Welcome to the second part of our lecture, and we are going to continue talking about spontaneous movements. So, when looking into these movements with more detail, researchers found that there was a temporal synchrony of the spontaneous kicking and of adult walking. The flexion and extension phases of an infant kick matched up with the gait of the flexion and extension that takes place in the adult human gait cycle, indicating that spontaneous movements may be precursors to adult movements. So if you look at the kicking cycle, you can see that you have the extended position, the knee flex, pause, knee extend, all the way out, and pause. And that was actually found to be similar to the way that an adult will flex, pause, extend, pause, and then take the next set of steps, which is very interesting because it really shows that these spontaneous movements are precursors. In order to come up with this conclusion, there was a lot of research that went into really coming to this point. Esther Thelen did a longitudinal study where she observed the spontaneous movements of 20 infants from ages 4 to 52 weeks in their home. There were over 500 hours of observation, and she recorded 47 distinct stereotypic movements. She defined a rhythmic stereotypy as a movement of parts of the body or the whole body repeated in the same form at least 3 times at an interval of 2 seconds or less. Some of the more recent research regarding spontaneous movement has found that these movements may be exploratory in nature and may be important for the emergence of reaching movements. Even these seemingly meaningless behaviors may be critical to the development of goal-directed movements such as reaching. So far, we've talked about spontaneous movements, but how are they different than reflexes? And what are reflexes? An infantile reflex is an involuntary or stereotypical movement response to a specific stimuli. The term refers to reflexes that are specifically seen only during infancy. These contrast with spontaneous movements because spontaneous movements occur without any apparent stimulation. So to overall outline the differences between spontaneous movement and reflexes, reflexes require an external stimuli to elicit a response, while spontaneous movements do not. Reflexes are specific and localized, meaning that a certain stimuli to a certain location will elicit a given response. And the same stimulus will elicit the same response over and over again for a reflex, but for a spontaneous movement that is not the case. So why should we focus on reflexes? They are signals to us about the maturity and the functioning of the central nervous system and serve as a very important window into the development of the CNS. They allow for us to evaluate neurological function and the development of the infant. So we can really see from an early age and throughout the first year of life how the central nervous system is developing by taking a look at these reflexes. So there are 3 main roles of reflexes. They are structural, functional, and applied. The structural role is to reflect the structure of the nervous system, as reflexes are a byproduct of the human neurological system. The functional role is that reflexes help the infant survive by helping them eat, breathe, and grasp. They also have an applied function as they lead to coordinated limb movements later on in life. The persistence of reflexes and the non-existence of reflexes can also be a problem. A reflex that persists beyond the average age of disappearance may indicate a pathological cerebral condition, and in contrast, a reflex that is either very weak or doesn't exist when it's supposed to could also reflect a pathological condition. So a reflex is present for a certain period of time, and if it stays past that, it's bad. or if it is just not there when it's supposed to be, that's also bad, indicating that there is some possible central nervous system trouble. Some warning signs of neurological problems, as indicated by reflexes, include an absent reflex, a weak or delayed reflex, unequal or asymmetrical bilateral reflexes, meaning that it doesn't appear on both sides of the body, a reflex that reemerges after it has already disappeared, or a reflex that is supposed to drop out and it doesn't, meaning that it's no longer supposed to be there, but the infant is still showing signs of having that reflex. So some characteristics of normally functioning reflexes include their responses to specific stimuli, that they emerge at different times, and that they disappear at different times. And the three types of reflexes that we look at are primitive, postural, and locomotor reflexes, and we'll go into details about each of these. The primitive reflexes are associated with the obtainment of nourishment and protection of the infant. These appear during fetal life and persist well into the first year. This table outlines the primitive reflexes with stimulus response time frame of the reflex and the warning sign. You can see that some of the reflexes have functional similarity to later goal-directed movements. Examples of the primitive reflexes that have functional significance are the rooting and sucking reflexes. For the rooting reflex, the stimulus is that the cheek of the infant will be touched, and the infant will turn its head in that direction and will open its mouth. The sucking reflex is stimulated by placing something on the infant's lips. The baby will start to suck. These have functional significance because they allow for the infant to drink milk before it has the ability to voluntarily do so. So basically, if the mother touches the cheek, the infant will turn in that direction. Then when you touch the infant's lip, the infant will start sucking. It's not a one then the other necessarily, because you can just touch the cheek and they'll move their mouth in that direction, and you can just touch the lips to suck, but these two really go hand in hand because when you're trying to feed a child, generally you want it to face the direction of the bottle and then you want it to suck. And around 2 to 3 months, these actions become voluntary, so the infant can feed itself, kind of in quotes there. It can basically suck voluntarily at that point. Another important primitive reflex is the grasping reflex, which is present prenatally and is present in both the hands and the feet. It is elicited by placing an object either in the hands or at the feet of the infant. The infant will then wrap his or her hands around the object with the hands or feet in order to elicit a grasp. The motion eventually becomes a voluntary grasp in the hands, and the foot grasp eventually disappears. There are warning signs of possible neurological dysfunction if the reflex persists after 1 year. When comparing the plantar foot grasp versus the palmar grasp, we can see that the grasp appears before birth and is stronger than the plantar. It becomes a skill around 3 to 4 months, and the plantar is not present at birth and emerges only around 4 months and declines around 1 year. This table goes over some of the other primitive reflexes that you should know, and this table has the primitive reflexes that help prevent the infant from getting hurt when he or she potentially falls. We'll pause the lecture here and we'll talk about the postural reflexes in the next part of the lecture.